Nothing urgent ever happened on Gnade 75. That's why Avior missed the 17 unseen notifications on his monovisor. Notifications summoning him to a council where the Velox would deliberate the surrender of his species to the humans. They would remain unseen for some time, as his visor lay forgotten on a moss-covered rock far below, while its owner spotted prey from somewhere higher. Perched on a massive tree branch, Avior's head turned meticulously slowly, his eyes scanning far below. The branches were enormous, a challenge for his comparatively tiny talons. Even at their tips, the branches remained thick and slippery, difficult to hold. The reason for the slipperiness was the fresh and humid air. Water condensed on the branches above and below. They grew so wet that tiny droplets constantly fell onto his colorful crest, occasionally trickling down around his reddish eyes and reaching all the way to the soft plumes below his neck. These towering, wet trees existed only in garden worlds, where gravity was so light that they could grow as tall as mountains. But Avior was currently paying little attention to them. Instead, his eyes were locked on a Zitharian, a swift and elusive quadruped creature. For a moment, everything around him seemed to still as he focused on the creature's subtle movements. His talons gripped the slippery branch tighter, claws twitching with instinct, ready to strike. The Zitharian darted again, this time pausing briefly behind a dense clump of fern-like plants, its tiny chest rising and falling rapidly, unaware it had already been marked by Gnade 75's most formidable hunter. Avior closed his eyes and let himself drift backward off the branch, surrendering to the pull of gravity. For a few blissful seconds, he embraced the sensation of free fall, the wind rushing past his feathers, and the damp air enveloping him. Then, in a seamless motion, he opened his eyes and spread his wings wide. His entire body synchronized in that singular moment where the freedom of the fall transformed into the focused precision of his attack. He adjusted his wings meticulously to minimize any noise, each feather angled just so to cut silently through the air. He sacrificed some of his speed for stealth, gliding soundlessly toward his target. Confident that the Zitharian remained oblivious, he was taken aback when the creature glanced upward purely by chance. Their eyes met for the briefest second before the Zitharian bolted from the fern-like plants, its slender legs propelling it toward a nearby maze of towering shrub stalks. Any other Velox might have abandoned the pursuit, accepting that dinner had slipped away. But Avior was not just any Velox. Memories of his failure during the last proving surged within him, the sad picture of being the only one left out among his peers, a reminder that he could no longer afford setbacks. In that fleeting heartbeat, he made a resolute decision. Failure was no longer an option, not even in getting dinner. His gaze sharpened, and every muscle in his body tensed in anticipation of the arduous maneuvers that lay ahead. Diving into the labyrinth of shrubs, Avior executed a series of sharp turns and agile twists. He wove between the densely packed stalks with remarkable dexterity, his wings adjusting constantly, his feathers grazing the branches. His mind was aware that the tiniest mistake could mean his death. The world around him blurred as he focused intensely on the fleeing Zitharian, his movements fluid and graceful. He dipped and soared, each maneuver bringing him closer, his talons gleaming in preparation for the strike. As he closed in, the Zitharian's eyes shone in the dappled light filtering through the canopy. The creature's lithe body, covered in a combination of green scales that mirrored the forest's hues, quivered with exhaustion. For a brief moment, Avior felt a pang of hesitation. The Zitharian stood trembling amid the foliage, its delicate frame almost ethereal in the muted light. But the hunt had been fair, and he was the winner. Steeling himself, Avior let instincts take over. His talons did not waver as he made the final move, his claws penetrating deep and taking the life of the little creature. Avior averted his eyes as the hot liquid spilled under his grip, the life draining from the Zitharian with quiet finality. He stood there, talons still pressed against the limp body, but the triumph that should have followed was nowhere to be seen. His focus from the pursuit remained, the adrenaline dulling any sense of pride. He couldn't see how the dangerous maneuvers he had just executed, how the risk he had taken for such a small reward, were beyond what any other Velox would even consider. He didn't realize that the precision, the speed, and the sheer audacity of his flight placed him a league above the typical hunter of his kind. Absent-mindedly, he transferred the lifeless Ztheran to his hands and began his slow walk back to the moss-covered rock where he had left his monovisor. His thoughts were already drifting to the next hunt, considering what he could improve, what sharper angles he could attempt, how he might close the gap even faster. The thrill of the chase always overshadowed the actual kill. He barely noticed when he slid the monovisor back over his eyes, until the 17 unseen notifications blinked into view. His blood ran cold. 17 notifications, all urgent, all summoning him to the council. Velox leaders were deliberating the surrender of their species. To the humans, a species that had demanded the galaxy surrender. Avior froze, his entire body stiffening as if the weight of the universe had suddenly landed on his wings. He stared blankly at the Ztheran, now useless in his hands. After what felt like an eternity, the body slipped from his grasp and hit the ground with a soft thud. Without another thought, Avior launched himself into the air, wings beating furiously as his mind raced to catch up with the reality he was trying to escape. "No, no, no! That can't be!" he muttered to himself, the words barely audible over the rush of wind past his ears. Humans? Deathworlders? Taking over the galaxy? The universe? And just days before the start of the new proving? His mind couldn't make sense of it. The humans were irrelevant in his thoughts. His concern was immediate, visceral. How could this happen now, of all times? He had worked too hard, risked too much, to miss another proving, which, of course, preceded the mating season. His wings moved even faster than they had during the hunt. This time, the urgency was deeper, more primal. He darted through the towering trees of Gnade 75 with reckless speed, taking every shortcut he knew by heart. He weaved in and out of the colossal branches, some as thick as entire land masses, cutting so close to the wet bark that dropped sprayed in his wake. His destination, Feathercrest, his village, where the council gathered near the matriarch Silara's palace. The closer he flew, the more his thoughts narrowed. He couldn't afford to miss this. Not this time. Not again. The potential loss of another proving clawed at his chest more than any abstract notion of humans conquering the galaxy. The proving meant everything to him. Status, survival, continuation, purpose. As Feathercrest came into view, a collection of structures built into the very trees themselves, Avior pushed harder. But fatigue was catching up with him. The earlier hunt had drained more energy than he had anticipated. Reluctantly, he decided to land before he reached the matriarch's palace. His wings stilled, and his talons touched the soft, mossy ground near the edge of the village. He sighed, preparing to walk the rest of the way, taking slow steps instead of flying. But as his talons pressed into the moss, something felt off. The village was quieter than usual. He scanned his surroundings, and just as he was about to move, he heard it, the soft pitter-patter of little feet. Before he could react, a swarm of Velox children burst out from behind the trees, rushing toward him in a flurry of excitement. Their small feathered bodies surrounded him in an instant, their high-pitched voices babbling all at once. Avior blinked in confusion, his senses still dulled from the shock of the news and the exhaustion from his flight. He hadn't even noticed them approaching, but now they were everywhere, tugging at his feathers, bombarding him with questions.
"Did you catch something, Avior? Take us flying, Avior. You're the only one who has time for us. Have you seen the matriarch? Are they really going to surrender?"
He looked down at their wide eyes, gleaming with innocent curiosity, and for a moment all the chaos swirling in his mind paused. The sight of them, their energy and excitement, felt like a strange contrast to the dread he had been carrying. But then reality snapped back into focus, and the gravity of the situation loomed once more. The council, the surrender, the proving. Avior forced a smile, crouching down slightly to meet the children's expectant eyes. "I'm sorry, little ones. I don't have time right now, but I promise another day I'll take you all flying." He hesitated, seeing the disappointment flicker across their bright spaces. Flying with them had become a regular part of his routine, something that not only brought joy to them, but strengthened his wings and kept him fast. But today, he simply couldn't. Seeing their faces fall, he added, "I'll take you flying later, if the matriarch allows me to leave." The slight promise reignited a glimmer of energy in them. They chattered excitedly again, peppering him with more questions, but Avior didn't linger. With a quick nod, he bolted, his legs moving faster than their small feet could possibly keep up with. He could hear their playful giggles and shouts behind him, but his focus was now locked on his destination. As Avior sprinted through the village, the structures built into the trees towered above him. Homes and gathering spaces nestled in the crooks of enormous branches, connected by wide, spiraling walkways. Moss clung to the bark like wet glue, while woven bridges stretched between the trees, their fibers blending seamlessly into the natural surroundings. Ahead, the massive tree of the matriarch's palace loomed. Its colossal roots formed the streets, their gnarled surfaces wide enough to house entire markets. But today, those streets were unusually still. There were no traders, no families wandering in and out of homes. The usual hum of village life was gone, replaced by a heavy, oppressive silence. Avior didn't need to think twice about why. His sharp eyes quickly picked out the gathering inside the palace's dark entrance. Even from this distance, he could see the mass of Velox crowded within, their forms shifting with anxious movements. With the sinking feeling, Avior rushed toward the entrance, his wings tucked tightly against his back as he darted through the living wooden doors. As soon as he crossed the threshold, he felt the weight of countless eyes land on him. The murmuring crowd fell silent, their attention shifting entirely to him, and he realized with sinking dread why they had reacted so sharply. His talons were still stained with blood, the dark crimson of his would-be dinner stark against the pale green moss stuck to the feathers of his legs. He hadn't taken the time to clean himself after the hunt, too rushed to get to the council in time. Now, with his feathers slightly ruffled from his hurried flight, and his bloodied talons on display, he looked more like a wild creature than a hunter who had just chased and abandoned his dinner. Avior straightened, his breathing steady as he caught his bearings. He had been too consumed with his thoughts of the humans and their surrender, too distracted by the urgent rush, and now he stood out like a sore talon among the crowd. He didn't need to hear the whispers to know what they were thinking. As Avior stood at the entrance, the murmurs within the grand hall quieted. The matriarch turned her gaze toward him. Matriarch Silara, whose plumage shimmered with brilliant hues of emerald and sapphire, regarded him with a calm expression.
"Avior,"
she called out, her voice resonating through the chamber.
"You missed my explanation earlier, but as the Velox's best warrior, I will repeat it for you."
There was nothing in her tone to indicate whether she genuinely meant the compliment, or if it was a subtle rebuke for his tardiness. Avior struggled to believe that she truly considered him the best warrior among them. Doubt gnawed at him, but he simply nodded, bracing himself for the scolding he expected. Matriarch Silara began, her eyes meeting his.
"It all started when a human ship approached one of our outer planets and transmitted a brief message. We mean harm."
A ripple of unease spread through the assembly. She continued.
"Humans are the only true warrior species in the galaxy. All other species have long feared venturing anywhere near their homeworld, Earth. When we first detected them, we scanned their ships and discovered an array of weapons beyond our comprehension, even though they seemed to believe they were alone in the universe. Such armaments made every species wary of them."
She shifted her weight, extending her wings slightly as she addressed everyone present.
"There was a collective decision to ignore the humans and avoid detection, hoping they would remain unaware of our existence. But somehow, a human ship found us. They not only located one of our planets, but also, in a remarkably short time, learned our language and sent us a message stating they mean harm."
The chamber fell into a heavy silence. Velox's faces reflected their fear and resignation. Matriarch Silara's voice softened but remained firm.
"In light of this, the entire galaxy has already decided to surrender unconditionally. Resistance is futile against such a formidable adversary.
Avior felt a surge of disbelief and frustration. The thought of surrendering without a fight was alien to him. Yet the mention of humans, the mysterious Deathworlders, sent a chill down his spine. He glanced down, noticing the blood still clinging to his talons from the hunt. Embarrassment joined his apprehension, but he wouldn't remain silent. In the face of the surrender of the galaxy, he had one concern that he couldn't help but express. Avior swallowed his embarrassment, lifting his gaze to meet Matriarch Silara's eyes.
"Matriarch," he began respectfully, his voice steady, "what will happen to this year's proving and the upcoming mating season?"
A stunned silence fell over the chamber. A wave of murmurs surged through the crowd, Velox exchanging incredulous glances. It was as if they couldn't believe he had voiced such a concern at a time like this. Avior felt a flush beneath his feathers, but maintained his posture resolute. He had asked his question earnestly, and awaited her response. Matriarch Silara's eyes narrowed slightly.
"Your greatest concern is the proving?"
she questioned.
"The humans are poised to take over the galaxy, and you are concerned about this?"
Realizing he was not on the same wavelength as the others, Avior took a deep breath.
"With all due respect, Matriarch, surrendering after receiving just 3 words from the humans seems premature. What do they mean by 'we mean harm'? Will they enslave us? Use us as food? Destroy our worlds? Demand our submission as their subjects? Halting the normal lives of billions over such a vague message is something I struggle to comprehend."
Gasps rippled through the assembly. The crowd stared at him in disbelief, feathers ruffling with agitation. Matriarch Silara tilted her head, her gaze piercing.
"And what do you propose instead, Avior? That we fight back?"
He couldn't tell if her question was genuine or filled with irony, but he pressed on.
"Matriarch, may I ask how exactly the humans acted when they delivered this message? Did they surround our planet with their warships? Have they destroyed anything of value?"
She regarded him thoughtfully before answering.
"They sent a single small ship to the outer reaches of one of our most populated planets, and remained there until we noticed them. Several days later, they transmitted the message and have not moved their ship since."
Avior paused, contemplating her words. If humans were the kind of warriors everyone believed them to be, their actions didn't align with such aggression. The thrill of the hunt was always in the chase. A lone ship lingering at the edge of their space didn't seem like the prelude to a conquest. A true warrior species bent on domination would have deployed a fleet deep into their territory, or launched an unprovoked attack.
"Matriarch," he said slowly, "the humans' actions contradict those of a species intent on galactic takeover. Perhaps their message holds a different meaning. I propose we transmit back to them seeking clarification. Invite them to elaborate beyond 3 ambiguous words."
His eyes brightened with a newfound conviction.
"If we resolve this misunderstanding, we can proceed with the proving and the mating season as planned."
His words hung in the air, the chamber falling into a deeper silence. Avior realized he might have overstepped, but he held his ground. The Velox around him stared as if he were the alien in the room, their expressions betraying their shock and skepticism. Matriarch Silara studied him intently, her feathers shimmering under the chamber's light as she searched for a counter-argument. She took a long moment before responding. Her gaze lingered on Avior, her eyes reflecting a mix of contemplation and mild concern. Finally she nodded.
"You might have a point, Avior," she conceded. "I will convey your opinion to the other planets and species."
She stepped closer to him, the crowd instinctively parting as she approached.
"However," she added gently, "you are a bit too obsessed with the proving. Hunting a Zytheran is meant to be a rite of passage, something you undertake once in your life, twice in your case. There's no need to catch one for every meal. You should give yourself a rest. Nade 75 is not a death world. You don't need to live as if it were."
Several days passed, and news reached Avior that the council had acted on his suggestion. To his ultimate astonishment, he learned that the humans had badly mislearned their language. The ominous "we mean harm" was actually supposed to be "we mean no harm." The entire galaxy, except for him, hadn't noticed the mistake. What seemed like good news quickly turned into a troublesome burden for Avior and the inhabitants of Gnade 75. As a consequence of his success, the Council determined that they should be the ones to receive the humans and discern their true intentions. They framed it as an important task, asserting that they were uniquely qualified. However, Avior sensed that the matriarch and the others viewed it differently, as the Council's way of avoiding direct contact with the humans, delegating the risky endeavor to them out of fear. This monumental responsibility seemed more like a heavy, unwanted burden than an honor to be accepted. He also noticed that some Velox began casting odd glances his way, as if blaming him for inviting the humans to their planet. He could feel the weight of their suspicion pressing down on him, even when they said nothing. The only silver lining, if it could be called that, was that he had been selected to handle the first contact. Whether this was a punishment or a sign of trust in his judgment was unclear, but his gut feeling suggested the former. He had the nagging sensation that he was being set up as the scapegoat should anything go wrong. As the time of the humans' arrival approached, Avior, the matriarch, and many other Velox gathered in a vast clearing. The area was a natural amphitheater encircled by the colossal trees of Gnade 75, their branches arching overhead to form a living dome adorned with cascading vines and luminescent flora. The ground was carpeted with soft, spongy moss, interspersed with vibrant mushrooms that emitted a gentle glow, an almost magical atmosphere. The air was thick with the scent of nectar and the distant hum of nectar-gathering insects, giving the clearing a sense of serenity despite the tension in the air. Avior's sharp eyes detected a subtle disturbance in the atmosphere, a slight ripple against the azure sky. A small, drop-shaped vessel pierced through the cloud cover, descending gracefully toward the clearing. The human ship was sleek and metallic, its surface reflecting the surrounding greenery like a mirror. It moved with an almost organic fluidity, emitting a faint hum as it approached, a sound both alien and strangely soothing. A hush fell over the assembled Velox. Feathers ruffled nervously, and soft whispers spread through the crowd like rustling leaves. Avior felt his heart quicken, but he kept his expression composed. The ship settled gently onto the mossy ground, its landing causing barely a tremor, as if respecting the natural harmony of the place. A moment later, a hatch opened with a soft hiss, and the humans emerged, clad in form-fitting spacesuits. The suits were streamlined and functional, seemingly made out of metallic alloys and flexible materials that accommodated their bipedal form. Their faces were visible behind transparent visors, revealing features that were alien and oddly familiar. Forward-facing eyes, expressive brows, and varied skin tones. Despite their strange appearance, there was something undeniably relatable about their expressions. Avior watched closely as they descended the ramp. His initial apprehension coexisted with curiosity. The humans appeared less intimidating than he'd imagined. Their movements were slow, almost cautious, and they carried no visible weapons, which further eased his concerns. He noted that their suits bore symbols, perhaps identifiers or emblems of their origin, something that might hold significance in human culture. One of the humans stepped forward, raising a hand in a gesture that Avior interpreted as a greeting. A moment later, a device on the human's suit emitted a voice in the Velox language, hopefully improved from before. "Greetings," it said. "We apologize for our earlier message. We come in peace and wish to learn more about your kind." Avior observed them closely. His first thought was one of bewilderment. How could such a friendly-looking species have caused the entire galaxy to consider surrendering without even intending to? They seemed peaceful at first glance, their movements deliberately calculated to avoid startling his people, though they were failing, as Avior noted the anxious rustling of feathers and subtle shifts among the Velox around him. Noticing the matriarch's tense posture and the silent apprehension of the others, Avior wondered why he didn't share their fear. Stepping forward, he replied to the greeting, his tone steady. "Welcome to Gnade 75.
We also wish to learn more about humanity."
The human who had stepped forward nodded and introduced himself. "I am Captain Elias Morgan," he said with a warm smile. "Your planet is breathtaking, like a land from a fairy tale. It's hard not to imagine that your species lives among the trees and builds streets over the giant roots." Avior tilted his head, not quite grasping the implication. His voice remained firm as he asked,
"What is wrong with living in trees and building streets over roots?"
A sudden hush fell over the clearing. He noticed the matriarch's feathers fluffing in alarm, and the other Velox appeared petrified by his directness. What surprised him more was the wide-eyed reaction of the humans, who exchanged quick glances among themselves, clearly taken aback by his response. Captain Morgan raised his hands in a placating gesture. "Oh, there's nothing wrong at all," he assured hastily. "We were just admiring the beauty of your world. We didn't want to make any assumptions that might lead to misunderstandings." Understanding their caution, especially after the previous galaxy-wide miscommunication, Avior nodded.
"I see. Misunderstandings can be problematic."
Hoping to ease the tension further and avoid ambiguity, he decided to address a question that had been lingering in his mind.
"We have been aware of humanity for some time," he began, "but we chose not to make contact because your ships carried many weapons. If you hadn't encountered other species before, why did you equip your vessels so heavily? Did you have plans to conquer the galaxy?"
He sensed the matriarch's sharp gaze upon him, as if he'd breached some unspoken protocol. The other Velox seemed uneasy, their feathers twitching nervously. It was clear they would have avoided such a direct question, preferring to remain overly courteous to sidestep any potential confrontation. To his relief, the humans didn't appear bothered. Captain Morgan sighed softly before responding. "When we first ventured into space, we didn't carry many weapons," he explained. "But over time, we intercepted faint radio waves and traces of intelligent activity that led nowhere. Humanity grew concerned. We worried we might not be alone, and feared we were being watched. So we armed ourselves for protection." He paused, then added, "Ironically, your species deciding not to make contact might have caused a self-fulfilling prophecy." Avior considered his words carefully.
"So, our attempt to avoid detection made you more suspicious and defensive," he mused.
"Exactly," Captain Morgan replied. "We feared the unknown, and in preparing for potential threats, we may have appeared threatening ourselves." Avior stood there, oblivious to the monumental significance of the moment. A mystery that had stumped the humans and every species within the Federation had just crumbled, and yet the weight of it all barely registered in his mind. Around him, the other Velox gawked in stunned silence, their feathers ruffling in confusion and disbelief. The humans, on the other hand, seemed only slightly bewildered, exchanging quiet glances, unsure of what had just transpired. But Avior's thoughts were elsewhere. All he could think of was the wasted effort, the distress inflicted upon billions across the galaxy, the untold resources the humans had poured into arming themselves, the Zytheran he had abandoned in the forest, and of course his skipped meal. Most of all, he lamented the loss of the proving and this year's mating season, which would likely be cancelled over a misunderstanding. Before he could try to fix any of it, there was one thing Avior needed to know.
"What are your species' plans for the future?"
he asked, his voice firm as he addressed the human captain.
"Do you intend to join the Federation, or was this contact made solely to resolve the misunderstanding?"
The humans exchanged a look, their expressions thoughtful, as though silently conferring with one another before responding. It was clear that Avior's question had stirred something deeper, making them consider not just their immediate plans, but the broader implications of their presence on Gnade 75. After a few seconds of silent deliberation, Captain Elias Morgan stepped forward, ready to convey his thoughts. "It's too soon to say for sure," he began, his voice steady but careful, as if aware of the weight his words carried. He glanced at his fellow humans before continuing, as though drawing strength from their silent agreement. Our current goal is simply to learn more about Nade 75 and the Velox culture. We want to understand your way of life, how you've adapted to this world, your customs, and the way you've built your society high among the trees. Your connection to the natural environment is something we've never encountered before, and we find it fascinating." He paused, allowing his words to sink in before adding, "We're also eager to study your planet's unique ecosystems, the towering trees, the wildlife, the flora that seems to glow with life. Your planet is like no other we've visited." Avior's heart raced. That was such a long and time-consuming list. If the humans intended to stay and study their culture, it would almost certainly mean the proving and the mating season would be delayed, or worse, cancelled. Panic set in. His mind whirred with possibilities, and then something clicked. The humans seemed to be an understanding species, open to dialogue. Without hesitation, Avior did the unthinkable. He advanced slowly toward Captain Morgan, his talons barely making a sound on the soft ground, and leaned in, his beak close to the human's ear, ready for a whispered exchange. Both the other humans and the Velox watched in stunned silence, their eyes wide with disbelief. Even the matriarch, with her usually composed demeanor, appeared speechless, frozen in place as Avior's quiet words flowed softly into the captain's ear, too low for anyone else to hear, yet heavy with unspoken intent. Captain Morgan's eyes widened in surprise. Then he glared at the other humans. "It was never our intention to cock—" He paused mid-sentence, clearly reconsidering his words. "To get in the way of the affairs of your species." After a deep breath, he added, "We will come back in a few months to learn about your culture and those events that unfortunately happen just once a year. We won't bother you for now, buddy." The humans exchanged brief farewells and began their return to the ship. No one could believe it when the sleek vessel lifted off, disappearing into the atmosphere as quietly as it had arrived. The Velox stood frozen, their feathers ruffled, eyes locked on the fading ship, unable to process the abrupt end of the encounter. Shock, confusion, and disbelief washed over their body language as they exchanged bewildered glances, struggling to comprehend what had just unfolded. Avior, however, felt only relief, his heart calming as the ship finally vanished from view, leaving him momentarily at peace. It was the matriarch who finally broke the trance. She rushed toward Avior, her face a mixture of disbelief and exasperation.
"Avior, don't tell me you chased away the galaxy's strongest species just because—"
She paused, sighing deeply, her voice dropping to a whisper.
"You couldn't wait another year for the mating season?"